Hello everybody and welcome back to How to Draw Comics the Robson Way by me, Will Robson. You can check out my work at facebook.com/Robson Inc. and you can get the first lesson there as well, or on my DeviantArt, which is robsoninc.deviantart.com. Okay, so let's get into lesson 2. Let's just go back to lesson 1 for a second. Here's lesson 1, okay? So in lesson 1 we discussed form, and this is still an extremely important step. You need to be able to render these objects in any position possible that you can imagine in order to create things like faces and bodies, and just to make everything appear as a three-dimensional object that we're looking at, because something that looks flat does not look realistic, not even more realistic, but it doesn't look like it's actually occupying space. Okay, so that's what we covered in lesson 1. I also wanted to go over planes, which I'll go over later, where, for instance, here's a form, but this side is a plane, this side is a plane, this side is a plane, and then here, this is a plane, this is a plane, and so on and so forth. I will make that a lesson later on because I realised I should probably cover that before we get to this lesson. And lesson 2 is figure drawing. Oh, that is a big, big subject, but I'm cutting lesson 2 down into parts. So lesson 2, figure drawing, part 1, the torso. I figured I'd start at the torso because everything that comes off of the torso is just a limb, and depending on where the torso bends will determine where you should be putting the limbs to create rhythm in the body, and rhythm will be another chapter. Anyway, so let's get started here. Let's zoom in a bit. Again, I probably won't be drawing much on this series for a little while because I just want to go over the basics so you guys can sort of understand what's going on here. Okay, so lesson 2, figure drawing, part 1, the torso. The majority of your figure drawing should begin at the torso, and as I just said, this is because establishing where the rib cage and pelvis bend will help you determine where to place the limbs, okay? And this will be coming probably in lesson 2, or lesson 2, part 2. It's going to get very confusing. Anyway, so the torso is divided into 3 sections: the rib cage, the abdomen, and the pelvis. So the rib cage is essentially where your arms and your head come off of. The abdomen is sort of your stomach area, and the pelvis is where your crotch and your buttocks is. Okay, and these 3 objects combined create the torso. So I also wanted to note that these are being viewed from the front, as in we are looking at this so that this would be the front of the chest, front of the abdomen, front of the pelvis. So the rib cage should be a sphere. A sphere. It sounded German. The rib cage should be a sphere. The ribcage should be a sphere combined with a box. Notice how I've put lines on the sphere to show the form's different planes. This is why I wanted to talk about planes. So this is basically, essentially, a sphere, but it's an oval. But these planes here, this front plane here, this X, shows me that this is looking from the front. So if you see here, there's the front, there's the front, you can't see it there, and this is the back. So this establishes what plane we're on. This is a long center line that goes down, and then these other lines, this is sort of showing me that there's this plane here where this plane is, and this is when you get into shading, because later on, let me make a new layer, because later on this is when you add lighting in. You know where to add lighting because you know what planes everything's on, and then you can render around it. Anyway, so that will be coming way later, but I thought I'd just talk about planes. Let me know in the comments below if you think I should probably have done planes first. I think I should have made that lesson too, so it might change a bit. Anyway, so the abdomen is a cylinder combined with a box. Now, when we were talking about form before on our last page, how do I go back here? Shouldn't there be a quick button to go back? I can't remember. Anyway, let's go back. Yes. Little detour. Anyway, so if you see here, it's when I was talking about the combination of these objects can create anything. You see, so a square combined with a cylinder combined with a sphere combined with a cone creates a head. Okay, so what I'm talking about, oh, I have to go back now. I forgot the shortcut. So what I'm talking about here is that here is the cylinder. You see these lines here, that indicates that they're split up into planes, so it's not a perfect cylinder, it sort of is cut into planes, which you can see here. So even though this is a cylinder, this is a cylinder, this is a cylinder, this is a cylinder, it's all established so that we know that this is all cut up. Same with this being a sphere, it's cut there so you can see that it's on a different plane. Think of it like if this was a piece of clay, and it was a perfect sphere, and then you sliced it. That's what I'm trying to talk about. Okay, so the pelvis includes the buttocks and the crotch. The buttocks will move depending on weight distribution. To understand the pelvis more, think of it as a pair of underwear. So this here looks like a complicated shape, but if you think of it like a pair of pants, then it makes more sense. And I would highly recommend to Google the ribcage, abdomen, and pelvis, and look at the skeletal structure that I'm creating here, because I will not be going into skeletal structure in this video lesson, because this is more about drawing the figure, but it's always important to understand what's going on underneath this. But I'm just trying to break this all into simple 3D objects so you can get going on your drawings, okay? So think of the torso as a giant bean that is fatter at the rib cage and thinner at the pelvis. So the rib cage will be larger than the pelvis here. But I'll skip down to here. When drawing the female figure, the pelvis is generally larger than the rib cage. And I say generally larger because it depends obviously on the figure you're drawing, and you know whether the woman has large hips and so on and so forth. Okay, so here's the front view. As you can see, this here is this here, this here is this here, and this here is this here. So combining all three of those, they stack on top of each other like that. You can kind of see that this slots in, if that makes sense. Like you can see that here, it slots into the abdomen here, and then the abdomen sort of sits on top of the pelvis there. So this is looking at it from the front, and when I draw my figures now, I still have a lot of these planes, but once you get used to knowing where these planes are, you will find yourself that you don't need to draw them every time. But I would say starting out, you should draw these in, just so you can let your brain know or establish where these planes need to go. So essentially that's what most of these lines are. So this is from the front. Here's a 3/4. 3/4 means it's not exactly profile, it's not exactly front, it's looking tilted on. That makes sense, obviously. So these holes here, obviously where we're going to be sticking our limbs later, and they're not going to stick out like directly, they're not going to go like that. They sort of stick on like that because there's a shoulder here, but we'll get into that later. Here's the profile shot. You'll notice that I'm making it bend, and this is because he's standing, and this is called rhythm, where the body has natural rhythms. You'll see it later, the leg goes like that and that and that. That's because this is the shape of the spine. If I was going to draw a spine in here, it would be wrapping around the pelvis here, and then sort of down, and then wrapping over the buttocks like that. That's, well, not really the buttocks, but it goes into there like that. So you should also probably look up on Google pictures of spines. Again, this is not stuff I want to get into because I'm not worried about skeletal structure. And then here's the back, which looks a bit confusing, but if you can see the difference, we don't have this bend here. This bend here is to show that this is the rib cage, essentially. Like your ribs go like that. So this little thing here, you might see it in a lot of, especially Jim Lee, he really draws a big rib cage, and so does John Byrne, which I really like. So it's important to think about that. Now, you can see that these are very flat. This is just our basic figure. Like, we're treating this as our skeleton. Instead of drawing skeletons, this is our skeleton, because eventually we'll be able to add all the muscles that we want to add onto it, which all comes later. But this, I'm telling you now, this is so important. Don't skip any of this step. Don't think like, oh yeah, I get this, I can move on. You need to get this type of stuff down perfectly in order to be able to draw Batman swinging from rooftops. I know I keep saying swinging from rooftops, but you see what I'm saying. This is the reason. If you look in any, I'm not inventing anything new here. You look in any of your anatomy or figure drawing books, these are always the first couple of chapters because they're so important. And until you realize that this is what you need to practice in order to get better at drawing, then once you get all this stuff down, you can move on to anatomy and all types of I suppose the more stuff that's fun. Anyway, so that's, as I said, that's the back. This is where the buttocks is, and the buttocks will move because there's a cheek here and a cheek here, but they're more connected to the leg. So if the leg was going to bend back, then the buttocks will move up a bit, but we'll get to that later. I don't know how many parts this series is going to be. Anyway, so I think I went over that part. And then at the end here, make sure that you have practiced lesson 1 on form to successfully determine the 3D objects we will be creating throughout the series. Again, I can't stress this enough because this is like a step that I'd always skip, and I'd always skip this stuff because I just figured I knew it. but chances are you probably don't, because the more you know this, the more dynamic your figures are going to be. Okay, so I think we're just about the end here. That is lesson 1, the torso. Later on we'll be going on about where the torso will bend, why it should be bending that way with rhythm, but we're going to go through all the limbs first. So I believe the next lesson will probably be arms, and then legs, and then head's going to be the last. I know everyone always starts drawing the head first and draws the body connected to it, but your torso is the rock. This is where all the rhythm comes from. So honestly, when you start any drawing, you should start with the torso. Okay, so thanks for watching. I've been Will Robson. You can check out my work at facebook.com/Robson Inc. Okay, until next time, bye.